Right, and we are live. I am going to wait a few minutes here until everybody shows up. Say hi in the chat. Welcome, Monica. Welcome, Kalyan. Say hi to us in the chat there and make sure you're able to hear me. I'll put a message in the chat here. Can you hear me? Just make sure our audio and everything else is good before we kick things off. Welcome, Kola. We'll get started in a couple of minutes here. You are able to communicate with me in the chat here. If you can just give me a quick thumbs up in the chat to make sure we're good. We will start kicking things off right after that. All right, thank you, Kola. Kola says they can hear clearly. Kalyan, all right, thank you, and I'll put a thumbs up in the chat. This is an interactive conversation, so feel free to continue putting your questions in the chat as we start to go through the materials, because at the end of the session, I'm going to come back and we're just going to go through all of the questions that you've left me in the chat area here. And so let me give you a thumbs up in the chat here. You can also feel free to just to put your comments and your emojis in the chat as we're going through here. All right, folks. So let me just see. We have Arthur. Arthur, welcome. We are looking to get started in just a minute here. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And let's make sure that we are all set here. All right, so my screen should be sharing now. And you should be able to see, essentially the ODESA big picture here in on your screens. Okay, so let's just kick things off, and as we go through, the rest of the folks will join us. And for the folks that are going to come in later on, if you're coming in a little bit later on, you can get caught up in the recording that's going to be available attached right to this event posting inside of our pro members area. And the recording automatically essentially just reposts itself. If you need to go back and watch it, it just reposts itself to the chat area here. Okay. So in this session, we're going to do a deep dive into the ODESA framework. And so for those of you who didn't have the opportunity to go through and join us for the first live session, that was kind of out in the public. It wasn't part of our pro members area. That was really out in the public. We published it on LinkedIn, and we had published it on our YouTube channel. But if you didn't have a chance to view that one, I'm going to quickly show you how you can get access for those of you who were not able to view that. Right now, where we're at right now inside of our area here, inside of our platform, is inside of this event. But if you just go to the pro members chat area here, you'll see that I have given us all a full recap of that first session that we had, because this session here is a continuation of that. Okay, so we're not going to rehash all of those concepts all over again. The recordings for those are available to you, and you can find the replay of the first session on LinkedIn just by clicking on this link here. And you can get a full recap of that in this pro members chat area to go through the concepts to see if you have any questions. Our session today, we're going to do a quick recap of what we covered there, but the real purpose of our session today is for us to actually do the deep dive, because in the last session, a lot of people asked a lot of great questions, but they wanted to see actual examples of the types of deliverables that a business analyst produces across this framework that we're talking about. Okay. At any time during the talk, if you have a question, please make sure you enter it into the chat, because again, I am going to scan through the chat at the end of the session. I'm going to go through question by question and answer all your questions for you. Sound good? Give me a thumbs in the chat. Give me a thumbs up in the chat if that sounds good to you. And let's get started with our recap of the first session. Okay. In the first session, when we had joined, we started off the conversation there essentially around career development, and we talked a little bit about why having a framework is important for your career development as a business analyst, because a lot of what we need as business analysts is a structured way of doing things that allows us to make good decisions for the work we produce, and those good decisions allows us to do good quality work, and that is what helps you progress your career. Okay, that's essentially a recap of what we talked about. Then we talked a little bit about what a framework actually is, and we talked about some of the characteristics that an analysis framework should have. And we said, what did we say in the first session? We said that it should be scalable, so that the framework that you're using should apply to small projects, but once you start to get on bigger and bigger projects, your framework should scale up so that it can continue to support you even when you start to get on medium, large, or mega-sized projects. And so it should be scalable. The second thing that we had said is that it has to be compatible, right? And what we meant by that is that your framework, right? Your framework as an analyst, the analysis framework that you have has to align with the frameworks that all of the other people that you work with have, right? So for example, we have our ODESA analysis framework, but we work a lot with project managers, right? And they have their own frameworks, right? In North America, it's the PMBOK. In most of Europe, project managers rely on Prince2. We oftentimes work with a lot of Scrum Masters who have a lot of agile frameworks that they have to live by, but our analysis framework has to align with that. We work with a lot of developers, and developers have what they call the systems development lifecycle. And again, our analysis framework has to align with that as well. So we went through that in session one in a great bit of detail, but whatever framework you choose to follow should always be compatible with the frameworks of the folks that we work with, essentially as project team members. It should be iterative. Why? Because we all live in an agile world, and any framework that you follow should be guiding you to continually come back and improve things, and to essentially be able, it should guide you in a way where you're coming back over and over again and repeating a certain process, whether it's to refine a certain software product that you're building, or whether it is because you're executing on a release schedule and you have to continue to iterate through your analysis process for different areas of scope. Okay, and so there's a couple of different ways that a framework can be iterative, but whatever framework you follow should be iterative. And when part of the reason why we teach the ODESA analysis framework here is because of the fact that it satisfies all of these in a very comprehensive way. Okay, and again, we covered all of that. I won't go through all of the details of how it does that. All of that stuff, again, is available to you in part one of the chat. And again, for those of you who are just joining us, you can find part one of that chat inside of our Pro Members chat area here, where we've published that on LinkedIn. Okay. The other piece The other thing that we had covered in part one is all of the different stages of the ODESA framework. So ODESA, we had said, stands for O for onboarding, D for discovery, okay, E for elaboration, S for support, and A for adoption. So in a nutshell, every time we execute on a project, we have to do a certain amount of onboarding. And this is the purpose of this session today, is for me to show you examples of how I actually do this on my projects in real life as a practicing business analyst. So we do a certain amount of onboarding, we do a certain amount of discovery, we do a certain amount of elaboration, and then we have to support our stakeholders after our elaboration is complete, because this is the biggest piece of what we do as analysts oftentimes. We have to support the rest of the team through the building of solutions and through the adoption of those solutions into business practices. Okay, so that is essentially a broad recap of the first part of this conversation. Okay, now for those of you again who are completely new and you did not have a chance to go through the session, before I get into the deep dive area, I'm going to quickly show you what the framework looks like. Let me just kind of clarify, move a few things around here. These are the things I'm moving around right now are the examples that I've pulled up for us to go through this process end to end with actual examples, so that you can see actual examples of the artifacts that we're talking about here. Okay, so the ODESA analysis framework, essentially, right, as we've said, gives us, right, it guides us through the onboarding. Okay, it guides us through, let me just go to draw here and select that and go back to draw, and I'll choose a bit of a thicker pen here. It takes us through onboarding, takes us through discovery, it takes us through elaboration, support, and adoption. And this visual gives you a very good bird's eye view of all of the major major steps that are involved across each of those stages, right? So during onboarding, for example, we have to perform a certain amount of orientation. What does orientation actually mean? We're going to get into that, because I have a full checklist that I often follow on all of my projects to make sure that I get myself oriented. So I'm going to walk you through this checklist and we'll discuss it. And if you have any questions, I'll answer your questions for you. Okay, but there's a certain amount of orientation that has to happen. There are stakeholders that are often involved, and we, at the beginning of every project, may or may not know who those stakeholders are. Okay, but we have to kind of discover a little bit about who those stakeholders are and very quickly get ourselves aligned with those stakeholders. All right. I'm going to show you a couple of examples again of how I do both of these things, right? And because in my real life, there is often things that I have to do. I have to take kind of proactive action by essentially reaching out to different types of people. And I'll show you examples of how I do that to make sure that I've understood who I need to talk to and what the expectations are around how I'm going to essentially help those stakeholders satisfy their expectations. Okay. Once you have a kind of a good idea of these pieces, right? These three major steps here are really kind of part of the onboarding process. But once you have a good idea of essentially of the lay of the land, then what you start to do is you start to transition into discovery. What is involved in discovery? Step number 1 in discovery is always current state. You have to do some current state analysis. You have to produce an as is. I'll show you the example that we provide our FOBA students on the project that we do inside of our FOBA course. So I'll show you an actual kind of structure of a current state document. Once you know the current state, you help your customers design out the future state, right? I'll show you an example of that as well. Then the next step, step number 3 here, is for you to do some gap analysis. You may or may not need to produce a BRD depending on the situation, but the gap analysis is often required because you have to understand what is the gap between my current state and my future state. Okay. Once you have all of these things done, right? Once you have these major steps completed as part of your discovery, then you are ready to start transitioning. You are ready to start transitioning from discovery into elaboration. And that transition oftentimes begins with the building of a product backlog. We'll show you an example of what a product backlog looks like. Okay. We'll show you what an example of what product backlog items look like, because the stuff that you enter into your product backlog is what you need to start elaborating on during the elaboration phase. Okay. And I do see all your questions in the chat, Erica. Welcome. Glad you were able to join us. And I will get to them. Okay. So, and for the rest of the folks, if you're just joining us new, keep on putting your questions in the chat. I'm going to go through all of them once I'm finished with this overview here. Okay. So those are all of the items. And when it comes to elaboration, we get into quite a bit of detail around how you start to elaborate the details of your product backlog items. In this session, we'll pull up a couple of examples of these, but we won't go through all of them in detail. I just want you to be able to see the level of detail sometimes that you have to go into as an analyst to be able to effectively communicate the business needs to your technical team. Okay, and that is what elaboration is all about. We won't get too deep into support and adoption. These are really kind of non-core tasks that you should kind of focus on after you've really mastered elaboration. Elaboration is the set of activities that you're going to take the most, you're going to have most participation in for most of your career, probably. Okay. The big thing to understand here, is that as an analyst, I'm going to kind of clarify. Let me just clear this picture up here with all of these markups so that we can get my next point across here. So let me just get rid of all of these. The big thing that you should be understanding as an analyst is that it's a little bit counterintuitive how a business analyst career starts, because you would think, if you were just to look at this framework, you would think, okay, well, as a business analyst, I'm probably, when I start my BA career, I'm probably going to be asked to go through this process sequentially, right? You might think, okay, well, I'll do a little bit of onboarding on all of my projects, and then somebody will ask me to do a current state and a future state and a BRD, et cetera, right? Unfortunately, that's just not how most people start their careers. What tends to happen for most business analysts is that they join a project, the product backlog usually already exists, and the business analysts are just required to start elaborating requirements. So a lot of business analysts just start by detailing out user stories, okay? And after a certain level of seniority, they're allowed to actually take on the responsibility of building the product backlog, okay? And then after a certain amount of after a certain amount of seniority again, that's when you start to actually go backwards and get more and more responsibility for doing a detailed current state and the rest of these things here. Okay, so it's a little bit counterintuitive because most business analysts typically will start their careers doing this, and they have to earn the ability to be able to do this and then to be able to do a lot of this pre-project discovery related work. A lot of this discovery work tends to be work that is reserved for more senior analysts because it oftentimes requires a lot of interaction with stakeholders that are a lot more senior. Okay, and so most employers are not very comfortable putting a junior level business analyst in front of a director or a vice president as soon as they start their careers, right? You kind of have to earn your way up to that point. So the framework itself is sequential in the way that it's supposed to execute, but as if you're completely new to the profession, you'll find that when you join the work world, you might not even know that a lot of this stuff is being done because it's being done by other people on your project and you are being brought in at this stage of the project. Okay, so that's an important thing to understand. Welcome, Jason. I do see your questions, and I will. What I'll do is right after I'm finished this, I'll kind of scroll up. We'll take a minute to go through all the questions, and then we'll start the deep dive. I think that's probably a good way for us to move forward on that. And for the rest of the folks, if you've joined late, keep on putting your questions in the chat, and we are going to go through them. And I know this event is supposed to be an hour, but I've saved an extra hour for this event to make sure that I'm able to answer all of your questions before we depart here. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to kind of clean up our diagram. I'm going to put things back where they originally belonged here so that we can now do a good detailed sequential walkthrough and just see some examples. Of how of what some of these deliverables look like, or what some of these artifacts look like. Okay. Before I do that, now that I have everything ready, let me go through. I'm going to scroll to the top and start answering questions. IML says the resolution is very low, can't see the text. Is that true for everybody else? Because if that is the case, let me just see. I think we have a reply to that. If that is true for everybody else, please just confirm for me, because I can always zoom in. And IML, just remember that we're not going through all of the details yet. When we start to go through the details, I'll be zooming in so that you can see the text a little bit more clearly like that. Okay, so if this is okay for everybody else, just let me know in the chat. I'd like to make sure that we fix that before I go any further. Yes, the resolution is low for you. So Kailan, for everybody, let me just do a quick check. Are you able to read this word discovery? I just want to try to see how low it actually is. Jason sees it clearly. Okay. I find resolution is low only on the deliverable docs currently. Okay, good. That's normal. These the way that we teach here is that we kind of do like a big picture view here. Okay, at this level, I don't expect you to be able to read these deliverables. Okay, because when we start to go through it over and over again, I'm going to be zooming in down to this level here, and I'm going to be actually just walking us through the words. So if that is clear, I think we're good. Okay, great. Jason says clear for me. Erica says yes, everything is clear. Stephanie says yes, I see it clearly. And welcome Stephanie, good to see you here. Okay, so let's do this. Let's dive out. Let's kind of zoom out of this a little bit here, and let's just go through. I'm going to go through the questions, and then we're gonna start a deep dive. So scrolling right up to the top of the chat here, Erica asks, hi Amal, would you mind including a link to part 1 in here? Yes, absolutely. I'll just put that part 1 right in the chat here for us as well. Let me just quickly pull that up for you live so that we can get that question answered. part one was actually, here is the link. And part one was actually on LinkedIn. So if you click on that, you'll find that it is going to take you directly into LinkedIn, and you'll see that the replay is actually on LinkedIn. Okay. So we got that question answered. And then Erica also asks, would you use a stakeholder engagement analysis matrix as part of your orientation process? Great question. Great question from Erica. Let's grab that question and put it right here. And once I walk us through, Erica, once I walk us through this, okay, I'm going to just put your question there. Once I walk us through this, I'll come back and we'll make sure that if it hasn't been answered by the time I'm finished, I'll answer it for you. Jason asks, and Erica also, oh, sorry, there's one question Erica asked, can you share with us exactly what you do for alignment? Yes, I will. In excruciating levels of detail that I think you'll probably be way more detailed than you actually want from Erica. Jason asks, are there a checklist of tasks for each activity box? Jason, yes, there is. And we're going to walk through the checklist for orientation. We may not have enough time to go through the checklist for all of them, but if that's the case, hey, we can always do a part 3 of the deep dive and part 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever we need to do just to get through the entire framework. But we will for sure go through the checklist that we have for our orientation piece here. Jason also asked, converting BRD requirements into product backlog, what do you take forward from the BRD to develop the backlog? Excellent question. I'm going to grab that and I'm going to park it right here to make sure we don't lose this. And then we are going to, I'm going to come back to this, Jason, to make sure I can answer it for you when we get to that point. Aimal asks, could you provide an overview of the ODESA framework versus BA-BOK knowledge areas? Aimal, I think that's an excellent idea. I think we should probably spend a full hour on this in the future live sessions. So here's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to put that request up here, and we're going to come back to this request. This is yeah, I'll have to prepare some materials for this one. And I do have actually a mapping between our framework. It's just not in a form that's presentable. I do that mapping just to make sure that we align with the BA-BOK. But this is a very good candidate for a future live session, I would say. Does the framework include line of questioning, question checklist for initial requirements and discovery? That's a question from Jason. The best way for me to answer this question. So this is actually, this is also, man, so many good questions today coming out of the chat. Let me just park this one. The short answer, Jason, is that there isn't a checklist for the questions because every project deals with a different subject matter and you have to ask different questions. But there's a section in our BAPC class where we actually teach you how to establish your line of questioning. That is, again, something we can pull out of the class and possibly do like a 1 hour session on just talking about that subject itself, because there's a bit of a methodical process that you have to go through to establish your line of questioning, depending on a bunch of different factors that exist on your project. So I'm going to kind of park this one here. Looks like I'm kind of building our own product backlog of questions here, and we'll start prioritizing these just like a regular product backlog, and we'll start to go through them as part of our live sessions here. How many more questions? All amazing questions coming through. Keep them up, folks. We're 30 minutes through, but we'll make sure we get through all of the material that we have planned for today. Erica asks, sidebar question, are you using Miro for your session? No, right now I'm using Microsoft Visio. So I have the professional version of Visio available. And we also actually have a bunch of lessons to teach students how to actually use Microsoft Visio the way that I'm using it right now. okay? Because this is how I typically run my sessions inside of our, when I'm doing my client work. All of my client work is on a series of essentially just big Canvas Visio files like this one. And there are specific things that I've had to do over the years just to be able to learn how to navigate it effectively, how to zoom in, how to zoom out, and how to kind of pick the right place that I need to zoom into so that I can do what I need to do in a specific area. So last question in the chat right now. It looks like Debo is asking, hi, Mal, thanks for the session. I'm in the middle of a project I joined halfway through. This model helps tremendously in understanding why I am struggling to elaborate the requirements and support our testers. Yes, that's right. And it's very common, Debo, to be exactly where you're at, because that is a very common place. It's a very common thing for a lot of employers to do, is to just drop their analysts, right? It's to just drop their analysts right into this area right here. That's probably where you're at, and you're probably being asked to do elaboration without any of this pre-project work, right? Any of the context that you need to actually do your job properly. And trust me, I've been there a million times in my career. Hopefully we can go through some examples today that will help you in your actual project. And just to finish your comment here, struggling to elaborate the requirements and support our testers. Some projects require more than one BA. How does this model help articulate where different BAs can work simultaneously? I have a, you know what, Debo, I'm going to take that comment. I'm actually going to put that comment right up against this email that I sent out to one of our stakeholders, because figuring out how to work with analysts is exactly what this email actually addresses. So let's park that one over here. Okay, let me just grab your comment again here from the chat, and I'll park that one right over here. Okay, so this email right here explains to you exactly how I make sure that I align with all of the other business analysts that may be on a large scale project. Erica's question: how do you do version control on these whiteboard canvas? I'm going to park that one right here so it does not get lost. Erica, short answer is that SharePoint does the version controlling for me, because I save these files on SharePoint. But this is an important subject. Version control is important for all of the deliverables we produce, and I think we should park that to talk about it. Okay, those are all the questions that we have. Let's do our deep dive. We have a ton of other questions that we can start to tackle, depending, not necessarily all in this session. We'll handle all the key ones in this session, and then maybe at the end of the session, we can do a little bit of prioritization and take some votes to see where we want to go next with our live sessions. Now, I'm going to dive in. And again, as I'm going through here, just keep on putting your questions in the chat. We'll start to handle them one by one. When we say orientation, okay, when we say orientation, what checklist I typically like to go through, okay? As a consultant business analyst, oftentimes I'm starting in a new organization every time I start a new project, almost every time I start a new project. So I have to go really kind of from right in the beginning to the end of my orientation with all of these. If you're a permanent full-time employee, you only have to do this once when you join your company. Oftentimes you don't have to do it on every project, right? But let's just walk through what my orientation checklist looks like. Okay, as soon as I join a new organization, one of the key things that I need to start doing is to start getting access to all of the resources that I need to be able to do my work. Okay, it seems trivial, but the fact I spend dedicated time to doing this, so that I've set myself up for success, and I'm not scrambling to get these things up and running when I'm deep in the middle of a project. So I like to do all of that stuff right up front. When I'm physically on site, I like to figure out where all the meeting rooms are and how I can actually book them through whatever system they have. It's usually Microsoft Outlook, where I can book a room so that I can host a session for the workshops that I'm running. Communication and scheduling tools, right? We need always something with email. There is now communication tools such as Teams and Slack, email, etc. I need to make sure I get all of that stuff sorted out. It's all very basic stuff. Project manager is responsible oftentimes for making sure that we have a space to store all documents. On my current client engagement, it took me forever to get that space set up. Why? Because, well, let's not talk about why. But it wasn't there, and I had to put in a lot of effort to figure out, hey, where are we actually going to be storing our documentation? Because it shouldn't be just be in my local drive. This is a massive project with collaborative team. Where is going to be our place, the one place where we need to hang out and share the materials? Get that set up, and then I make sure I have my modeling tool. 99% of the time in enterprise, it's Microsoft Visio. On rare occasions, it'll be something other than Microsoft Visio, something like a Lucidchart or something else. But the reason I've been using Microsoft Visio my entire career, and even before my career, actually, I started learning Microsoft Visio when I was in undergrad, and this was more than 20 years ago. But the reason why I continue to use it is not because it's the best tool available, it's because it is the one that my clients expect me to use when I'm on their site. And when I'm working on their projects, Microsoft Visio has a very tight grip on enterprise, and that is the tool that we teach because that is essentially the one that you're going to run into 99% of the time in enterprise. Then there are oftentimes many systems that are involved in the project, and I try to get access to the sandbox versions of the systems that I have. So for example, on my current client engagement, I'm working on HR systems, and there are multiple HR systems on my project. So I have to figure out how to convince the admin to give me access to sandbox on their Workday implementation, give me access to their sandbox on their SAP HCM implementation. It's called SuccessFactors. And those are the two core systems. I don't necessarily need access to other systems there, but every new project, there's a different system, and I need sandbox access to that system because as part of my discovery, I'm going to need to go into those systems to try to figure certain things out. Okay, access is critical. If it's a vendor-based system, I try to get access to their documentation. What does that mean? Perfect example is that I have access to Workday Sandbox. I try to get access to Workday Community, and Workday Community is essentially basically like a whole knowledge base that they have for Workday administrators and users. So I have to get access to that documentation. Oftentimes, it's a separate step. Sometimes, okay, if I believe I'm going to be needing to do data discovery work, I try to get direct access right to the actual database of the system instead of the actual applications, okay? This is a lot more common on projects where I'm working on a custom-built software. Custom-built software oftentimes has separate, it's structured a little bit differently. I won't get into the details. Structured a little bit differently where you, as an analyst, might be able to just run your SQL queries directly on the database. On some projects, I need to do that as part of my data discovery. So I try to get all of this access essentially sorted out right up front. Okay. Whether I need it or not, the likelihood is usually high that I do need it, but I make sure I try to get it as quickly as possible because because downstream, when I need an answer to a question, I'm not going to be able to afford to wait a week to get that access. Okay, I'm going to need that answer right away. If it's a system that I don't have a lot of experience with, I try to get myself, okay, let's kind of clarify this. Let me clean this up a little bit. That's fine. I try to get the learning and development team or whoever the trainer in the organization is to give me a walkthrough of these systems, okay? Sometimes I work on custom built systems that are built specifically for a specific function, and the knowledge of what that system is inside the organization. It's not like I can go and learn about it somewhere else. There's only probably 2 or 3 people who know how to teach that application properly. I try to get access to the people to make sure that they can actually at least just give me a walkthrough of what the application is and what it's intended to do, what it looks like, what kind of features and functions are there. Okay, so in many organizations, it's the learning and development team that does that. Sometimes there might be another analyst in the project or on the team that is responsible for doing the training for that application. And so they're the person I try to kind of secure their time. Okay. File access. I try to get access to all and any other projects that are related to my project, even though most organizations are very tight with their security around projects, right? Earlier here, we said, where are we storing the items for our project, right? That's our team space. This item here is me getting access to other people's projects. Why? Because I can learn a lot from knowing what these other projects are doing. If my project interacts with theirs, I can just go into their documentation and start kind of getting myself educated on what they're up to, instead of just being in the dark about how my project interacts with theirs. Okay. Now, so that is kind of a list of all of the major resources. Okay. I'm just going to kind of change the color here so that we can distinguish the next set of items that we're looking at here. Next thing I need to do as part of my onboarding is I need to learn how the company runs their projects. Every company I work at has a slightly different way of executing a project. Okay. So what I like to do is I like to go into their intranet to try to figure out whether they have standard procedures, whether the project management office or the business analysis center of excellence has any materials for me to go through so I can adapt my analysis approach to how the company functions normally. And so I'm always looking for material inside their intranet to understand what is their current business analysis process. Okay. Oftentimes I find that they don't have one of these. And so that's where ODESA comes in. I say, well, okay, well, you guys don't have that level of maturity in your analysis processes. That's not a problem because I have a standard process that I follow on all of my projects that we're going to apply here. Okay. Then I try to make sure that I align all of my work with the other people that I'm likely to run into on the project. Project manager is a big one. Software development teams and their agile coaches. Their software development teams, SDLC. Sometimes, it's not often, sometimes I might have to interact with the DevOps people, okay? Especially if the project manager is very busy and I'm asked to step in to do a little bit of project management, I might be the one who's now responsible for getting the developer's code into production through the DevOps team, right? And then the change management team might be the folks on the business side who are training their end users and essentially just making sure that all of the changes that are coming as part of our product releases are going to be absorbed into their practices properly. So I try to just kind of get the lay of the land and make sure I understand all of these things that are in there so that I can start to align my own business analysis approach to how the company functions. Again, all of this, if you are a permanent employee, you really only need to do all of this orientation, okay? All of this orientation, you really only need to do it once, okay? And you typically, if the company you're working with that's hired you has a really good onboarding process, a lot of this orientation stuff might just become very painless for you. But through experience, I find that not many companies don't have very good onboarding processes, which means I have to do the due diligence myself to get myself up to speed. I have to get myself oriented. I have to take on that burden myself. And that's why I have this checklist, is because over and over again, I go from company to company, and I don't want to have to rely on their onboarding process for my success as a business analyst, right? So I own that process myself. And if they have a good onboarding process, fine, it makes my job a little easier, but I don't have to rely. My success doesn't depend on how well they onboard me, because I own that task now. Okay. So hopefully this gives you a good idea, right? When I say orientation as part of this framework, hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea of the level of action you may need to take to get yourself properly oriented to your environment, so you're setting yourself up for success, essentially. Okay. Let's talk about stakeholders. Let's move on to stakeholders, because we have some great questions here. Okay. And so the question that Erica asks is, do I use a stakeholder engagement, stakeholder analysis matrix? Short answer is I don't, but I wouldn't shy away from using it if that's something that you need. Okay. My stakeholder analysis oftentimes just consists of, and I think, Erica, you'll be familiar with this because you've taken our course, but I'll quickly pull up our stakeholder analysis example that we show in the course. Oftentimes, this is from our FOBA course here. Let's pull up. Where do we cover stakeholder analysis? It's in very early on in the project, and it is right down here. There it is. This one right here is right. Fairly early on in the project, I try to, the way that stakeholder analysis works in my mind, it's a little bit automated, is I'm trying to figure out how well structured the project is. And the way I do that is that I look to see whether the person who's onboarding me, okay, sometimes it'll be the director, like in the example for my current client engagement, it's the director of HR. I try to see, does the director of HR know that we need all of these roles? Well, okay. And if she doesn't, is there a project manager yet on the project? And if there is, I try to figure out, does the project manager in the back of his mind have a plan to structure a project that includes all of the roles that we have listed here? And what I'm trying to do here is I'm just trying to figure out where the gaps are going to be on this project when it comes to roles and responsibilities. Because oftentimes on projects, things tend to be very informal. So when I ask the project manager, hey, who's our project sponsor? The project manager has no idea, right? And they don't even know that that's a role that they're supposed to be filling, right? It doesn't happen that often with a project sponsor. But when I join a project that has a project manager, sometimes I'm saying, okay, who are the people who really know the current state processes inside out? And the project manager has no idea, right? All they've done is they've helped the project sponsor build a business case. They are this person. They might know some of the product owners and product managers. They probably don't know any of the process owners. And then they'll kind of fall short here. And now I know, right, just by having this in the back of my mind, I know where I kind of need to pick up the stakeholder analysis part of this. So I'm thinking to myself, all right, on this project, this project manager has done a pretty good job of identifying these people. I'm kind of on my own to try to figure out who the rest of these people are, especially the group of people that I need to talk to right away usually are these group. So I need to now find other ways of figuring out who these people are. Okay. The way I do that, Erica, very specifically, the way I figure this out is by doing things like this. Okay. Let me just show you an example of an email that I sent to on my current client engagement. Essentially, there is a person inside of the company who's responsible for doing a bunch of other things. And what I am doing here is I'm just taking the initiative to start to figure stuff out on my own. Okay. I know that the person who's onboarding me is too busy to try to help. The project manager hasn't really figured out everything that I need to know. I need to take the initiative to do stakeholder analysis. And the way I do that is that I just reach out to people and say, hey, look, we haven't been formally introduced yet, but I'm going to introduce myself. I've been hired by this person here, right, to help this company on this project. I'm currently working with the PMO on the business case, and I'm trying to understand who the stakeholders are so I can get them ready for the workshops that I need to run. That's it. And my stakeholder analysis begins like that, right? So again, it's a combination of saying, all right, who do I need to get access to? Who's going to tell me who these people are? And if I see that nobody is really kind of thinking about the challenges that I'm going to be facing here, I have to start taking the initiative, right? And so oftentimes I'll start to just ask around. The person who is onboarding me, oftentimes, again, it's a manager, director, sometimes vice president level person. I say, hey, who's like, can you just give me even one name so that I can start to discover who the actual customers are and who the people are? They'll give me a name and say, yeah, this person might know who does that job. And I say, okay. And I just leave it with them. And I just take the initiative and start introducing myself to people in the company. I explain to them what it is that I'm trying to do. And I say, can you give me a couple of minutes? Can you give me a couple of minutes so that we can sit down and start having a conversation around who these stakeholders are? What I'm essentially trying to do is I'm trying to identify now who these people are that I need to talk to. And as soon as I figure out who they are, I'm just going to write these people a similar message to say, hey, look, this person right here told me that I learned, I would say, from this person that you're the person who performs this task today. This is the project that's ongoing. I'm not sure if you know about it. I need 30 minutes of your time so that I can understand kind of what your world looks like a little bit. Okay. And that's it. When it comes to stakeholder analysis, that is the process. Okay. The process is where are other people leaving off the stakeholder analysis on this project, and where do I need to pick up to be able to set myself up for success? And again, it's my approach to doing business analysis, and what I try to help all other business analysts do is I try to help business analysts become completely self-sufficient as much as possible so that you can start to perform at a much higher level. Okay, you're not dependent. You're not dependent on the time and the mood and the willingness to help of the people around you. You're starting to kind of take ownership of your onboarding. You're starting to take ownership of your stakeholder analysis. And the reason why I do this is because in every company, it's a different situation. Inside the same company, two different projects might be running completely differently depending on how good the project manager is, right? I don't know what I'm getting myself into in my next client engagement. So I can't afford to depend on them for my success. So as part of the teaching that we do, like in our classes and in our philosophy altogether, is that as an analyst, you should be self-sufficient as much as you possibly can be. Okay. And so understand, right, for you to be able to do this, you gotta kind of understand what these different roles are. You gotta understand why you need them on the project so that you can start to make judgment calls about stakeholder analysis as you start to go through. Now, Erica, going back to your question, do I use a matrix? I guess, yeah. I mean, if you look at this, I guess this is a bit of a matrix, right? So technically speaking, you're right. I just never thought of it that way because I just have this in the back. I don't actually write it out like this. I just have it in the back of my mind and I'm looking for the right people. So short answer to you is now yes. So that is my stakeholder matrix that I'm using essentially. Okay. When it comes to alignment, again, this email here has a couple of things kind of baked into it, okay? Because not only am I trying to figure out who the right stakeholders are, but in this email, I am trying to sync up, right? I say here, sync up with you to see where our work might overlap, okay? What is this doing? It's getting me aligned with all of the people that I'm surrounded by. Okay. Rarely am I on projects where what I'm doing is totally isolated from what the rest of the organization is doing. It's almost never the case. So now I need to figure out, okay, where are the boundaries? What am I doing here that is potentially something you might be doing that I have no idea? Like, are we duplicating work here? What's going on, right? I'm trying to kind of get myself oriented with that. So this email here kind of demonstrates the idea that I need to sync up with you, right? And there is another, so this person here was a business analyst. Is a business analyst on my current client engagement. And this person had hired me, and essentially we all kind of report to this person right here. But this person just doesn't have the time to introduce me to everybody that's on there. They have a massive team, right? So he just says, yeah, go talk to this person here and go talk to this person here. And I say, okay, I've got it. And what I do is I just start to align myself with everybody around me. Okay. The whole purpose of alignment, right? Going back into this, so we figure out who the stakeholders are. We start to align ourselves with those stakeholders, depending on which group of stakeholders they're at, right? So the people I'm aligning myself in that email, for example, in this case, right, in my current engagement, I'm kind of like somebody at this person's level, and I'm aligning myself oftentimes with other people at this level and aligning myself with the work that's being done by this person and this person here, essentially. So that's very basic alignment that I'm trying to do with the analysis team, just to make sure that we're not kind of stepping on each other's feet as we start to move through this massive project. Okay. Hopefully all of this is making sense, and I do see your questions, Erica. I will come back to them. Rest of the folks, again, if you have questions about any of what I'm talking about here, put them in the chat. I know we're at time, but like I have a full another hour. I'll just continue to go through here. It'll be part of the recording if you're not able to stick around for the rest of the talk. But you'll see that I have a lot of these types of things oftentimes where I have to start aligning on things with people who are much more senior than me. Okay. In this case, right, if I was to kind of show you who I'm trying to align with that email, I'm kind of somebody who's at Shauna's level again. And now I'm trying to align with somebody who represents one of the project sponsors. Okay. So the project sponsor on my current project is like a VP level person. I'm trying to align to their director. Okay, I'll say DIR. I'm trying to align with their director now through this email, because I'm saying, hey, look, we in this case here, right? I kind of been hired by one person. I've spoken to their vice president and she's told me what she wants. Now I have to work with the vice president's directors to figure out, okay, who's doing which piece, so that I'm clear on what I'm essentially just trying to get the knowledge out of the director here. What I'm saying to her is, I need to align with you on the initiatives. I'm working with this person and this person on this initiative. Okay. I'm also working with this person and all of these people on this initiative. And I'm working with the IT people, right? These IT people on getting a business case approved. Me and you, we need to sit down and figure out, like, is there anything else that you think that the vice president needs, right? Is there anything else that this VP forgot to tell me about? Is there any of this that perhaps you might be working on? Like, so I'm essentially just trying to make sure I get myself aligned with this person. Now, as a junior analyst, you're never going to have to speak to a vice president, or you're never going to have to speak to a director level person directly. So a lot of your alignment might just be like internally within the team, and you may be trying to just figure out who these people are through like a more senior analyst. Once you reach a certain level of seniority, you start having conversations directly with higher level people. Okay. So like, again, a lot of these tactics are things that I've developed even when I was a junior analyst. I started to kind of do a lot of these types of things just to get myself aligned. And so this is essentially what alignment means, is that you're starting to get a sense of who the people are, and you're starting to get clarity on what your role looks like within this framework that's being established for the project. Okay. If I'm thrown in, right, Thibaut, earlier you mentioned that you're lost because, well, not lost, but earlier you mentioned it's hard to get to deliver because you've just been thrown in here. A lot of that is that you may not necessarily have been given all of this context that we've just kind of talked about here, right? Like, do we know who the right folks are? Do we know who's doing what? Is there other stuff that's going on there that your user stories or use cases might be dependent on? There's a lot of this pre-work that has to happen before you actually just start writing user stories. Okay. So those are the first three tasks that we have. Let's take a look at an example of a current state document. Okay, so once I kind of have a lay of the land, oftentimes on my projects, what I push for is to say, okay, before I get in and start trying to write any requirements or user stories, I need to understand your business. And the current state analysis is essentially me now reaching out to my subject matter experts here, right? And saying, hey, I just need 30 minutes for you to explain to me what it is that you guys do today. Where are your pain points? And when I have those types of conversations, bring them in, I just try to absorb as much as I can from what they're telling me. I don't always catch all the details, but I know that I need to essentially paint a narrative of what it is that this person, right, what it is that a certain group of people within an organization are supposed to be doing, and how that kind of sequences itself out. Okay, and the content of this isn't that important, but the idea here is that I'm talking to the subject matter experts in this area, in this area, in this area, to figure out what it is they're supposed to do. And it's now my job to kind of string it all together to understand how this organization actually functions, so that I have a clear picture of how they currently operate. Okay, and oftentimes I'll produce a process map. Sometimes my clients will say, we're not spending any time for you to do any of that, right? They say, you just need to get in and figure out what they need. And so one of the challenges with current state analysis is that they'll say, my clients will say, we don't have time for current state analysis. We gotta start getting straight into the customer needs and understanding what they do. And so they try to cut this out completely out of the project. Makes my job a lot tougher because now I don't have a clear picture of who the people are and what they're supposed to be doing today. And now I have to try to scramble to figure out what their future state needs are, right? Without understanding what their current state looks like. Okay. But if you do need to produce a current state, it looks something like this. And again, this document we're sharing is the document that we provide to our FOBA students who have to read this document to understand the current state so that they can produce the deliverables for our assignments. Okay, and the structure looks something like this, right? It's usually a process map, comes with a narrative that describes the process, and it comes with a list of pain points that we've heard from our customers. Once we have a clear picture of that, future state design begins, and we say, okay, well, this is how your process looks today. We're going to figure out what it's supposed to look like in the future. This can be very difficult, especially if you have stakeholders who disagree. Stakeholders who disagree about who should be doing what in the future state, right? The recruiter might say, no, this is not my job. That's the HR business partner's job. And I'm doing it today only because our organization is dysfunctional, and they'll try to push their tasks sometimes into, like, there's a lot of stuff that can happen when you have a group of stakeholders who are trying to figure out who's supposed to do what. Future state process design helps you kind of clarify all of that to say, okay, we've decided as a company that the HR business partner is now going to be performing task X, because even though recruiters doing it in the current state, it's not really part of their job. That actually should be part of the HR business partner's job, right? Like, you have a lot of those types of conversations to design the future state of their processes, right? And so that is what future state process design typically looks like, and that's what the exercise looks like. Once you have these two, you have enough information to say, okay, well, we currently do it like this. In the future state, we need to do it like that. Let's just document it point by point. And so gap analysis typically says that you have a current state. Let me zoom into this. You have a certain current state. You have a certain desired future state, right? And we're going to do a little bit of gap analysis to figure out what the difference is between those two, so that we can start to figure out what kind of solutions are feasible to help cover that gap between the future, the current and the future state. So that is what your gap analysis looks like. So I'll try to move through this a little bit more quickly. Sometimes when a deliverable like this isn't enough, you might need to produce a full-scale BRD that everybody in the organization needs to review so that they agree on what needs to be built. Okay, and that tends to be on much larger projects. Smaller projects, oftentimes you can kind of just get away with doing something like this without producing any business requirements. But on larger scale projects, oftentimes you need to produce a full BRD. And even though you might have some future state processes done, everybody in the company says, okay, let's just look at what we're actually committing to and what we're actually asking IT for. And so they'll want to see the BRD after a million conversations around future state process. Okay. I do see the questions coming in, and we will get to them. I'll just quickly finish this to get to the product backlog piece, and then we'll start to take some questions. So when you do the current state analysis, right, you have statements like this where we say the requisition from, there's a lot of manual stuff, let's say, for that's happening, and a lot of that comes from your pain points section. Okay. Your future state starts to do a little bit of high level solutioning to say, hey, I think we can solve this current state issue if we had a future state that looked like this. The gap is that we basically just need to implement something that helps us achieve our future state. Okay. And once you have that, you need to vet it to make sure it's doable. And once it's doable, these things can actually start to form the basis, okay, for what your solution is going to look like inside the product backlog. Okay. Now, how do we build out the product backlog? The way that we teach you how to do process modeling actually in FOBA feeds directly into this. And these items, and you see that like we have these blue boxes. A lot of those times you can just take that blue box and actually you can take that blue box and actually add it as a product backlog item directly. If you've done this, if you've done your future state process mapping properly, you can start to build your product backlog very, very quickly by just converting the green and blue boxes from your process maps into your product backlog. Okay. And so that is the secret. That is the secret that nobody taught me when I was doing business analysis. I thought, hey, I need to have a million additional conversations with our customers and ask them what they want. It's not actually good requirement solicitation practice. Good requirement solicitation practice is that you essentially help your customers design their future state processes. Okay, you help them do some gap in feasibility analysis, and you take the results of these two things and you put them inside your product backlog, and voila, your product backlog has been built. And you have full traceability because you can trace back your product backlog items to specific conversations you've had back here. Okay. So I'll quickly move on from that because this is the piece. This is actually where we start our FOBA course. Okay, so we explain all of that stuff, right? Even in our first day of FOBA, everything that I just kind of explained to you, we kind of explain that to our students. But what we aim to do in that class is that we aim to try to teach you how to actually start writing user stories, use cases, how to elaborate those using wireframes, how to elaborate those using screen specifications, talk a little bit about business rules. We talk about data dictionaries. We talk about, where's our data models? Logical data models, right? So because of the fact that most business analysts start their careers here, like I said earlier, right? I feel a little bit compelled to teach that as kind of like the initial skill set, this as the initial skill set for foundational level business analysts. And what we do, right, a lot of the stuff that we've shown you here is that we kind of provide you samples of these things so that you know what's supposed to be there before you start elaborating, right? And Debo, I think that kind of touches on, again, kind of touches on the situation you might be in with your current client engagement there or with your current project, is that you're asked to do all of this without any of what we've talked about here having been done, right? And so as part of the foundational skill set, we try to teach analysts to make sure they know how to actually elaborate, right? Actually, if you're in a situation where you have to do just this part of the job, you should be able to do just this part of the job, even without a lot of these things, right? But the way we want you to learn the skill set is that you should know that these things are supposed to exist so that when you start to try to write a user story, you already know what all the gaps are, and you could potentially start to fill in some of the gaps in these different areas, right? To help you just get the bare minimum done, to have like a reasonable amount of details for doing elaboration. Again, in the real world, oftentimes we're just kind of thrown into elaboration, right? I can't count the number of times I've joined a client engagement. They've been mid-project, they've skipped all of the stuff here, and the director of software development says, Emil, we just need you to start writing some user stories here because the dev team is waiting. They got nothing to do, right? And I say, okay, well, sure, but the fact that I know, because of this ODESA framework, the fact that I know all of those other things are supposed to be there, I push back a little bit, right? I now have some substance to say, okay, Mr. Director of Software Development, can you please show me your current state analysis? They'll say, we don't do stuff like that. I say, okay, well, you've just introduced some risk into this project by skipping this step, but let's move on. Can you show me your future state process? They'll say, no, we skipped all of that too. We're going straight to development. Okay, then I say, what about, like, do you have any gap? Like, is there anything that you have for me here? And if the answer is no, I say, well, hold on a second. I'm going to have to raise a major risk here because we have no idea what it is that we're supposed to be building, yet we're starting to build, right? And I can express that using the language of risk. I express that to the person so that they understand, wow, by skipping the discovery process, we've introduced so much risk into this project. And oftentimes, that's the first time they realize that that's what's happening on their project, right? And again, this is in extreme cases where there isn't a lot of project management discipline, there isn't a lot of business analysis discipline, there isn't a lot, like the organization is just very development focused. And if I get hired by a development manager, they don't care about anything else. Their job is to just start building, right? And they come at it from that frame of mind. And now I'm the person who has to help them see the bigger picture, right? And I've been in situations where I've told the development manager, I said, hey, look, I can write as many user stories as you want, but I can't guarantee you that your customers are going to be happy at the end of this because I have no idea. I have no idea whether we're even talking to the right people. I have no idea whether we even understand essentially what the real scope of this project is. Like, we have no idea about any of this stuff, right? And I have no idea whether it touches any other systems, right? So if you want, I'll do as you say and write user stories, but I think we should take a 2-week pause and let me just go through and see how many of these questions I can answer before we start writing user stories, right? Having a framework like this in your back pocket, you could I'll give you a screenshot of this, just print it out. If you're ever in that situation, just put it down in front of whoever is asking you to start writing user stories and say, hey, what about all these other things? There's so many questions that we need to answer back here that we haven't answered. And just use this framework at least to buy you a little bit of space to give you what you need, right? So that's kind of how I run all of my projects, and that's part of the reason why we teach this framework, right? Is that it's a comprehensive framework where even if you're on a small project, all you need to do is just kind of scale down, right? On smaller projects, you might just have like a very small project. You might just have 1 or 2 stakeholders. Okay, you might not have as much alignment to do because there isn't that many other analysts or many other people there. But it's geared towards scale. So when you start to scale, right? Like the project I'm on right now is one project, has 4 work streams, but this project itself is part of a program that has 5 other projects in it, and we're executing it all at the same time. And we have to maintain alignment between my 4 work streams and the 5 other projects that are going on. When projects start to scale, alignment becomes a major issue because you all have to kind of work in lockstep. Otherwise, it's going to become total chaos, right? Kind of how projects start to scale. And so the way we teach FOBA is that we kind of give you a lot of this discovery stuff, and we ask you to start producing the elaboration details really quickly, and then we essentially grade you on the assignments that you produce. We give you 4 assignments on there. So for those of you who are interested in actually learning how to do this, our last FOBA session is going to be running, enrollment's closing on Monday. Sorry, I just finished grading for the last cohort, but I'll tell you that if you're in dire need of learning how to do the elaboration piece of it, I would say that this is probably the right course for you, but I would encourage you to actually just go in and check out FOBA to see if it's right for you. No pressure. We never pressure people to enroll or anything like that. But if you really need to learn how to start producing those deliverables quickly, this will help you do it in about 12 weeks is the full length of the course. Okay. Let's go to the questions. I'm going to scroll all the way back up to the last question that I answered, and let me grab a quick glass of water. And for the rest of the folks that, if you're on this chat, keep on putting your questions in. Let's start going through those to make sure we can answer them all. Okay. What time are we at? 11:22 in Eastern time here. I'm going to scroll back up. Let's take a look. Sidebar question: are you using Miro? No, I think that's where we left off. Debo asks, "Thank you for the session. I'm in the middle of a project." I think Debo had a question where we asked, "How does this model articulate where different BAs can work simultaneously?" Okay, so that's kind of the last question where we had left off. So Debo, let's go back up to your question here, because the question you had asked was this one right here. This is where we left off. So how does this help us articulate where different BAs can work together simultaneously? Well, look, if you're doing alignment properly, hopefully you're starting to take actions like this, so that, let me just kind of clarify this. Hopefully you're starting to take actions like this, where what you're doing here is that you are saying, we need to sync up because you're a business analyst, I'm a business analyst, and we have this other business analyst. We all need to kind of get together and just map out who's doing what, so that we know who to go to for what. So that's kind of how it's done, Debo. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, that's how alignment is done in reality. Erica asks about version control. We got that question. I'm curious, do you set up a risk register for yourself? So many great questions, Erica. I'm going to start parking all your questions, Erica. I hope you don't mind, because we're going to come back to a lot of these. We're going to keep on coming back to a lot of these over and over again in our future live sessions here. Okay, so do you set up a risk register? Short answer I'll give you now, but the short answer is it depends on whether the project manager is, I don't want to say the word good, but whether the project manager is any good or not. Sometimes good project managers often have this ready already, but when they don't, I do feel compelled to escalate certain risks when I see that something's going to break because this risk isn't being managed. So I don't necessarily own the register as an analyst. The project manager owns it, but I will take action if I see the project manager kind of not doing what I expect them to do. I do sometimes take action to raise risk to management. But I think this, again, these things we can have full conversations about, but that's a short answer. Erica also asks, loving all of these questions here. Let's let's pull this one up here. So this one asks, where are you currently using AI on your projects? Are you working on projects that are very highly regulated government sectors where, for security reasons, given the data? Yeah, that's right. Yep. Train the model and the data resident. How do you manage this given AI is a fantastic tool? I'll give you a short answer, but this can probably be the subject of like 2 or 3 live sessions on its own because it is so huge, so huge. This right here, Erica, right now, the only thing I'm using AI for is to teach myself how to do data discovery in Workday. Okay, Workday again is one of the HR systems that I'm working on, and AI is actually quite good at helping me do the data discovery. So if I need to figure out, hey, what kind of compensation data exists in this system, I go to ChatGPT or Grok and I say, hey, do you understand Workday? If yes, give me step-by-step instructions on how I can figure out how much comp data is in this database or in this system. Gives me the steps. Sometimes it gives me wrong steps, but generally speaking, it's pretty good. It's saying, hey, go to this function here, do that, and here is a list of all of the comp data that exists. That automatically has essentially replaced us having to hire a Workday consultant, a very expensive Workday consultant, to come in and start answering those questions for me, right? Or for me to actually take up their own Workday resources. This is that I'm using it mostly for discovery. A lot of those other questions are very pertinent, but I think let's park all of that and come back to it in a future session because there are certain, I'm not allowed to share certain pieces of data with any of those AIs, and I can't break that rule, right? For my clients, even though it might make my job easy in certain areas, I don't have the authority to do that. So right now, I'm just using it to train myself on how to do most of the discovery work on standardized products, and it's working quite well in that area for me. Short answer. That's the short answer. Let's keep on going through the comments here. And again, we will come back to these in future sessions. Devo asks, Devo says, I can relate. How do you measure gaps and know where to get what you need at the starting point? So that's a good question. And it's a bit of a long answer, Debo. So let's put it in here. Let's put it in here and let's just go through. Let me just go here, draw to here. I'll park it. Let's come back. Let's come back to all of these questions in our future sessions. And thank you for the comment there, Devo. I think that a lot of this accuracy just comes from the fact that I think most projects probably execute the same way globally, right? Every company has the same challenges that they experience. And so I think a lot of analysts have a lot of these same experiences, and they just have struggled to kind of overcome a lot of these things. So how do you measure the gaps and know how to get where you need to? Okay, that is a very, let me go through to where we're at here. Let's kind of clean up our gap analysis so I can try to answer. You know what, let me just grab a new copy of that gap analysis and paste it here. So the question essentially you're asking here, Devo, it seems like is that how do we get to this answer here? Okay, we know the current state, we have a sense of the future state. How do we get to this answer? The short answer is that, let me try to see if I can even give a short answer to that question, because it's not that simple. This right here, we know where the current state comes from, right? It comes from our investigation of the current state. The desired future state is a bit of a, like, let's just look at this. It says an online electronic form that managers can easily access. If you read this, right, whoever wrote that desired future state has already done a little bit of solutioning. Okay, where the gap comes from. So let me just take it one step at a time here. So whoever, let me go to draw and let's clear that. Whoever, we know where the current state comes from. The person who wrote the desired future state already has things they know what the future state looks like. So they've kind of written it out here. The gap comes essentially from saying, okay, we know that this is the current state. Somebody's kind of taken the put down an idea of what their desired future state is, assuming that this is the right future state. What would be the gap? And so if you kind of know what the current state and the future state, the gap is just kind of an expression of a requirement that needs to be satisfied to satisfy this desired future state. Where this desired future state comes from is a combination of places, okay? So if my customer tells me, hey, we have this problem right now, okay? Everything is in MS Word. After having done many projects, I've seen this problem solved a million times. I have a pretty good idea of how this problem gets solved. So I can take a reasonably good guess at what the desired future state would be. I would write it down and I would show it to my customers and say, yeah, that's kind of what we had in mind too. Or they might say, no, we're looking for a solution that does something completely different. So where the gap comes from is the fact that I take my best guess based on my experience of what the future state is, run it by my customers to see if they agree or don't agree. Once we have some consensus on what the desired future state is, the gap is just the future state written in terms of a requirement language. Okay. Now, if you're new to this and you don't have the experience to come up with the desired future state, what you do is you grab your current state's materials and you throw it over the fence to the developers and to your tech team and say, hey guys, they have this issue right now. We're trying to figure out how we can help them with it. Let the technical people do all of the solutioning, right? Oftentimes technical people want to do the solution they believe is their job. So what they'll do is they'll say, hey, we can provide a certain type of a solution that is going to give you this desired future state. And it kind of becomes a bit of a back and forth between what your developers and your tech team thinks they can do and what your customers actually are willing to accept and pay for. Okay, that's kind of in a roundabout way how that process goes. Hopefully that answers your question. Let's go back up to the top here to see what other questions we had. Where did I put our questions here? I think that those were all the key questions that we had. And Erica, you mentioned several times about how us as VAs often join a project while it's ongoing. What are your thoughts on using tools like Google's Notebook LM as info repository to help us do quick research, to help us get up to speed? That is another AI tool actually that I use. So Notebook LM is excellent at, I think we should have a full session on this because I can show you exactly how I use all of the AI tools that I use. But Notebook LM itself is excellent if you need to learn domain knowledge really quickly. So what I do typically is I go to YouTube and I say, hey, find me a video that talks about, absence management, because this company does absence management. I have no idea what's involved. Just find a whole bunch of videos on absence management. I feed those videos into Notebook LM, so it kind of strips out all of the text out of the videos. And then I just started asking it for a summary. I'll say, what is absence management according to these sources? And it'll just give me a bullet point list. And then I'll say, oh, I don't understand that piece. Explain that to me. Notebook LM will try to explain it to me, but if it doesn't, I just take everything that's in Notebook LM and I paste it into ChatGPT and say, this is what Notebook LM told me about absence management. I'm trying to get myself up to speed on this project in terms of domain knowledge. Can you explain this to me? Boom. It gives me clear, concise explanation. And then I walk into my next meeting with my customers way better educated about their business area. So very good tool. I would say use it as much as you possibly can while it's still around, because it may not necessarily be. Okay. We have a ton of questions. I don't know if we have any more. I do see Erica says, thank you for the recommendation, Erica. And for those of you folks who don't know, Erica's one of our students who just, anyways, I'll leave it. One of our FOBA students, and I appreciate that, Erica. But if you are looking to get educated, just make sure you've kind of looked at the FOBA course, you've considered it to see whether it's a good fit for you or not, because this is the last session that we're teaching in 2025, and the enrollment for that closes on Monday at 8 p.m. this Monday. Let's pause it here. This is like our first of many live sessions that we're gonna have. This is our new platform. Where you're at right now is our new platform. There will eventually be a monthly fee for the pro membership for us to continue having these kind of discussions. But for now, that fee is not there. So you're welcome to continue joining our monthly sessions until we have our new platform up and running to that point. So I want to thank you all for attending. I hope this deep dive has been helpful, kind of giving you a little bit of clarity on how to apply the ODESA framework. And if you do have any other questions, you remember that you also have access to our pro member chat area where you can ask those questions, right? And again, that pro member chat area is this area right here. If you don't have access to it for whatever reason, please let me know. And I'll make sure that it gets fixed. The platform that we're on right now is the new version of our membership platform. We're currently migrating off of our old one into this new one. And so there are a few kinks that we're kind of just working out while we are still in beta. All right. I will make a review or I'll do a summary of this deep dive as well. And I'll post something very, very similar to this deep dive notes that I had inside of this chat. What I would ask you to do is in this chat, please let me know which subjects we want to have covered for next month's live session, because if I don't get any recommendations, what I'm likely going to do is just choose a topic that I think is the most important right now, tentatively. I have some stress management techniques that I can share with you in our next live session. If I see that there are burning questions, right? We're kind of part of a community here. We can decide, we can start to vote on what we think the next major subject should be. And we're gonna have another session like this, and I'll just kind of walk us through and share as many tips as I possibly can to help you, us as a group, just kind of understand how to get over a lot of these obstacles. The career that we're in is not as simple as a lot of people make it out to be, but if you start to kind of understand how to overcome a lot of these obstacles one by one, you'll find that your stress goes away and your life becomes easier. You start to increase your income, and you start to kind of build a really good, meaningful career for yourself, essentially. So this is our new platform. Please, in the chat, if you have right now, I would say just go in there right now and just put down your ideas on what you want to have covered next. If we don't see a whole lot of ideas, I'm going to talk about stress management on May 24th. And we have one of our FOBA students from the last cohort actually asked about stakeholder engagement. This one here is a FOBA students only session that we're going to have. But monthly, we are going to have pro member sessions that are not exclusive for FOBA students either. We can talk about BA consulting, right? One of our other partners, Marcus Udokang, is also a BA consultant. And so in this conversation. Him and I will just kind of join in. We'll share our experiences of what it means to become a consultant. What are the pitfalls? What are the benefits, right? And the consulting strategy here, we call this kind of the lone wolf strategy. If you're starting to become, if you want to become an independent consultant, we'll explain to you why we call it that, right? In July, we might be having conversations around team structures, right? Different size projects, different types of projects have different team structures. I think it's an important subject for everybody to understand. It's something I want to talk about. But again, all of these are, we're going to kind of start to, outside of our student only sessions, we can shift around the subjects based on where we think everybody needs the most support. Okay. So there are a bunch of other questions. I would say I am going to have to jump off in about a minute or so because there is a recruiter I used to work with asked me if I could help her son understand the BA profession. He's possibly looking to get into it, and I have to meet with him in about 20 minutes. So I would say let's just park the conversation here. We'll take the questions. We'll take the questions that we have. IML asks, any source reference to get more info about ODESA Framework? IML, I would say let's park that. The ODESA Framework essentially is outside of our FOBA class. There isn't a whole lot of other stuff that we've published so far, but I think we can continue to talk about it as part of these. So maybe if you can put that request in the main pro members area here, I'll categorize it and we'll start to kind of work through that to see what other kind of details our members are going to need to overcome their challenges here. Okay, folks. I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to take a bit of a break and I'm going to hop on the call to see if I can help this young person understand our profession a little bit better. And again, I'm doing it as a favor because that recruiter had helped me a lot in my career when I first transitioned into consulting. She spent a lot of time with me to kind of understand the lay of the land and how the recruitment business works. And she actually helped me land, I think, like the first 3 of my client engagements to help me kind of make the transition. So the least I can do for her is just kind of see if I can help her son get into the profession. Let's park it here. Thank you all for coming. Hopefully it's been helpful. The replay will be reattached right into the replay for this is going to be reattached right into the actual. All you need to do here is to go into the past. And when you go into here, the replay is essentially just going to show up right here after this is done. Okay. Kalyan says, hi, Amal, thank you so much. You're very welcome. You're very welcome, everybody. Arthur says, great session. Many thanks. You're very welcome, Arthur. You're very welcome, Kelly. Hopefully we'll see you all on we'll see you all on the next one as well. Okay, we'll say our goodbyes for now. Take care, everyone.